One thing that we're always thinking about as individuals is what does it mean to have a calling, at least for those of us that are faith based. And so today we're kind of going to unpack on what it means when you come face to face and have to confront your calling. Today we have a special guest with us, but before we begin, you know who I am. I am attorney Jamila Moore, and I really make sure that the business that you're building is protected and that no one can steal it from you. We're going to get more into that later. But first, let's start with Diane Reed. She is the founder and CEO of Analytics Anew. She is a transformational calling coach and speaker. Her goal is to help as many people as possible live confidently and unapologetically in their calling by creating transformational content and leading transformational workshops. Diane comes in peace, but she is about her father's business. And you know what? We're just welcoming her here today to give us the business. You ready, Diane?
I am ready. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah. So we're going to jump right in. You know, we're so blessed to have her and her expertise here today. She did a dynamic presentation on something that I think all of us really battle with is this thing of like false humility. It's like a mix between the imposter syndrome, but I'm really killing it. But, I don't know what to do about it, what people going to say to me. Talk to us about it, Diane.
Yeah, so I like to define false humility as this. So it's the minimizing of self talents, giftings, abilities, all of that, all the uniqueness that makes us great. We minimize it for what we believe is for a greater good. And that's where this false sense of humility comes into it. But in actuality, we are self deprecating ourselves and we are minimizing our uniqueness. So that's what the talk was about. I've gone through this journey on my own self. So I'm not speaking out of just my intelligence. This is something I've experienced, I've lived through, and I have some empowering words as a result. So that's always my goal, to communicate what I've learned throughout my journey so that people don't have to go through it as long as I did, or they don't have to go through it at all. So that's my goal with everything.
So, what I'm hearing you share with us is that this practice of minimizing what we do, who we are, all of the things that we're capable of, is what could be defined as false humility.
Yeah.
And whenever we think about things being false, a red flag needs to go up in our head because we are children of God and we're supposed to live in truth.
That's it.
And so false humility puts us at a place where we're not actually living in the truth of who God has created us to be. Diane, why is that problematic?
Yeah, that's such a good question, because I think because we think it's humility, we think we're doing it for some type of greater purpose, or we think we're more Christ like as a result. But if we're actually trying to be Christ like, let's examine Jesus Christ, right? He knew exactly who he was when he came to this earth, and he let his people know exactly who he was. He did not downplay that he was the son of God. He did not downplay that he was the way, the truth, and the light. He communicated that so that it was easy for people who needed him to find him. And when we minimize who we have been called to be, the people who are in dire need of what we have to offer them cannot find us. So they stay in bondage because we're not living in our truest, authentic self.
We have to live in our truest and authentic self. And you know what? We're having an honest conversation here. We're
Mhm.
not telling you this because it's easy. We're telling you this, or we're talking about this because there is a mandate to do it.
Yeah.
There's a mandate to go through the process. And so, as I think about my own journey with false humility, it it is something that you have to battle at each level of growth that you encounter. So, when you start off and you're, new in a field, you battle it in a certain way. And then when you may rise to the top of the field, you battle it in a certain way. And so, one of the things that I think could also be helpful for this audience is really pausing to recognize what is God's truth about you now.
Mm.
And sometimes we're operating off of an old, outdated truth about who we are. And I recently did a reel, and one of the things that I talked about was I didn't recognize that my needs and values had changed. But how
Mm.
can I grow so much and not do the work to understand that everything shifted when I shifted? And so when we talk about that confrontation of calling, how would you, coach someone, transform someone's life who is now at that place of like, oh shoot, it's a whole new ball game with me.
Yeah, that's so good. I think first it comes with self-awareness. So you have to be aware that you are not the same person that you were last year, 2 years ago, 5 years ago. You've gone through different levels in your education, maybe. You've gone through different career paths. You've had different relationships. You had relationships fall off. You had new relationships. All of these things um, allow us to see ourselves, and they directly affect us. So as we're evolving into the person that we're becoming, we have to first establish where we are right now. So once we establish where we are right now, we can understand, how am I supposed to live authentically at myself at this stage? What are my what are my interests? What are people around me direly asking me to do? What are they seeing in me that I may not be seeing in myself, because I'm so stuck at this old version of me that I'm like, oh no, but I used to be a manager, but right now you're living in director authority. So right now you have to see yourself as a director. So that comes first with resetting your mindset. So, and that comes with first self awareness. Who am I right now? What are my giftings? How are my giftings needed right now in this stage that I am in?
There is a recurring theme each week, it seems like, with this whole thing about self awareness. So you can live in the I am, but you won't ever get to the more. You won't get through the journey if you don't stop and become really self aware and almost like have a plan to make sure that you are being self aware. You're constantly pausing to be aware of where you are, what's happening around you, what's your giftings. Are you a director now? One of the things that I feel like Holy Spirit has recently challenged me on is this thought of, what do I say to myself? Oh, I'm just little old Jamila. And it's
Mm,
like,
you're not
honey,
little. You're not
honey,
little.
honey,
And you're
honey.
not old.
Like it's just,
Mm,
it's just a term that people use, and we have to watch our mouths. Right. That's a part of
yeah,
it. It's actually watching our mouths. And the Bible says that life and death lies in the power of the tongue. And so if we're not doing the thought process right, to have the belief process right, our tongue doesn't exercise its power.
that's it.
And
That's
so if we're given a tool of power, why would we not exercise it? Right. And so taking it back to what you just said, like you were a manager, but now you're a director. Is your tongue there?
ooh, that's
Right.
good.
Like
Are
what
you
what what's
affirming yourself in that? Are you
yeah.
establishing that in the earth? Are you creating that? Are you surrounding yourself with the people who are speaking to that? Because I think that's also important. Once you establish where you currently are, you have to surround yourself with the people who are either further past where you currently are, or can affirm you in the stage that you're currently in. You don't need people who are reminding you of who you used to be. You're not there anymore. They're stuck in the past. You're living in the present. environment. So sometimes that comes with reevaluating our circle, which I think is also very key as you're trying to evolve to the next level. When you have people who are stuck in the past, they weigh you down. And this is not about people not having value or people not cutting people off per se. It's just allowing yourself to create the boundaries around you that support this next level and this next version of yourself.
So, as we continuously confront our calling, because it will be revealed more and more over time, what I'm hearing you say is we have to do a consistent reevaluation of our environment.
Yep.
And with that reevaluation, that comes with kind of pulling out the people. And I don't say pulling out, let's just say rearranging,
Hmm.
right? Doing
Repositioning.
some spring cleaning.
Hmm.
And so, I hear one of my YouTube mentors say your dress code is your access code, right? And
Mm.
sometimes your wealth is who you relate to, right? And who's relating to you and how you all are conversing. And so it's not an indictment on anyone if we can no longer communicate in the way that we used to. It is an indication that you have to come up higher because I've gone higher. And if it is almost like, talk to me about this. I want to know your thoughts on this.
Yeah.
We idolize in a sense marriage to our soulmate, right? But if we're confronting our calling, if we have to do life together, we have different types of marriages, but we have these marriage like relationships that require work and the ability to grow at the same rate too. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's so good because I think we stress soulmate and kind of the unity as it relates to romantic relationships that we actually don't speak enough about, I believe, about the friendships that we have. And friendships can be as deep, sometimes even deeper than some marriages out here. So if your loyalty is to the friendship rather than what God is calling you to do, I think sometimes we have our values misaligned because my greatest purpose is to ultimately bring glory to the one who created me, which is God. And sometimes the different levels that we go to require us to kind of rearrange, reposition people in our lives, even though it may be difficult. And I recently just went through kind of a friendship breakup where the Lord just was working on me and saying, for where I'm taking you, this person cannot handle the altitude, the how do you say this? The higher you go, the mountains that you're climbing, the air gets thinner. And sometimes people don't have the lung capacity to handle the new heights. And it's not an indictment on them, it's just where they are in their lives. So, in order for you not to kill them, trying to drag them to a capacity they can't handle, and you killing yourself trying to keep that weight, it's better to just release. And I think if we think about it that way, where we're saving the person that we're kind of disconnecting from and we're saving ourselves in order to reach the glory of God, I think then hopefully it will be easier. That's the process I had to continue to tell myself as I was kind of pulling back from this person. And it's like, no, my goal is to offer no resistance to what the Lord will have to do through me, to me, and within me as I go in this journey. And sometimes that means doing the difficult things. And I think that's actually a lie I've been told in my Christian journey, that it would be easy. Nothing about this is easy. So let me let me say that now. You are supported in the fact that it's
Tell
hard.
us.
It is hard, which is why it's so important to have people who are like-minded around you and who are in similar phases, because you realize you're not the only one going through it. So let this be a confirmation that you're not alone. We're all kind of going through these stages and these transitions trying to figure it out, which is why I'm so passionate about creating spaces where people can dialogue through it, where they can get the tools and the resources to be supported through it, so that they don't kind of get lost in the process and forget that the goal on the other side of this is fulfillment. Because when we live in our callings, multiple callings that we're called to throughout our lives, we have a sense of fulfillment that money can't buy, friends can't coach us into it. There's a god-given fulfillment tied to our calling, and that's the goal. It's glory to God, and then the fulfillment that we have as a result.
Well, Diane, I mean, you said so much there, but I want to lean into how to be a lifesaver.
Mm.
And I don't know if in your childhood in New York, because I'm a California girl,
Hey.
there's some New York ways.
New York, stand up.
And we used to eat these things called lifesavers.
Mhm.
And you really broke down a pivotal concept for people to really deep dive, because sometimes when we're going through these seasons of shedding, these are opportunities for us to really sit down and sit back and think about how we need to save our life and then how we need to save the life of someone else. And when we're saving our life, it requires a sacrifice. And so, one of the things you outlined for us, that sacrifice might mean turning away from our friends. That sacrifice may mean a season of isolation. That sacrifice may mean sowing a seed that you couldn't imagine at a place where you couldn't imagine, because that's what you need for the next level of your calling. And so, I just really didn't want the audience to miss the lifesaver moment
Yeah, that's so
and
good.
to really, lean into it and say, this is an opportunity for me to save my life and save their life, because they don't have the capacity to go. They don't. And that means that you have to place boundaries in certain spaces, and you have to become sensitive to your spirit and your discernment to know what God is saying about people to you in this season.
Ooh.
And recently God is talking to me like, you actually can't talk to these people as much.
Mm.
Like, you cannot, because they cannot
Mm.
understand the altitude
Yeah.
on which you think. And it almost seems as if that's cocky, that's arrogant. But then we go back to false humility, right?
Mhm.
And so, as you have been confronting your calling, what has been some personal ahas you've learned about yourself?
Mm. So good. I think that number one, this is personal for me, that my voice matters. I think when as I was acting in false humility, I was minimizing my voice because what let's be true, very truthful here. I started downplaying myself once in middle school. I was attacked verbally by a group of girls who just didn't like me just because I was me. And what that showed me was that I will be attacked if I live in me, in who I have been called to be. And for me, my survivalistic mentality turned on, as a 12-year-old would probably do, without being guided by, any outside mentors or coaches. I actually kept that event to myself. And my internal brain was like, hey, you're going to minimize your voice. You're actually going to speak softer so that people don't draw attention to, so that you don't draw attention to yourself, so that people can't see you. And what that taught me time over time was that, here's the crazy thing: you may be minimizing yourself, but other people can see the anointing on you. So now when you're called into the spaces, when you're given the opportunities to lead, to speak, to mentor, to coach, you're actually unprepared because you've been living in this false version of yourself. So for me, I was given those leadership opportunities. I was given those speaker opportunities, and I wasn't living fully in who God created me to be because I was so focused on not getting attacked. And what I've learned is that you get attacked if you do, you get attacked if you don't. And what I had to accept is that I am not living to please other people. I am living to please the Father, the one who has authority over my soul. When all this is said and done, I want to hear, "Well done, my good and faithful servant." So if that means you won't like me, that's fine. They didn't like Jesus either. And it's just the case. And I had to really accept that because I have a tendency to people please out of survival. New York City can be very harsh. Let's say it that way. It can be very harsh, and it trains you to only think about yourself. And I don't want to live that way anymore. And that's what I've discovered as I've been walking more and more in my calling, is that I want to live for the one who created me and to impact the people who are called to me, because I realize this is a matter of life and death for me and life and death for the people who are called to me.
No, that is so rich. It's a matter of life and death. And somebody may be thinking about physical death, but when we don't operate at our highest God potential, we live dead lives.
Mhm.
Right? We don't get the opportunity to experience the fullness of his glory. We don't get the opportunity to experience the fullness of his power. We don't get the opportunity to experience the fullness of what he set out for us to have. And so good. And you give us so much stuff. I just go back and lean in it at one point, but I don't even know how to lean into all the points, Diane.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this so much.
This is a prime example of why we have to have the courage to confront our calling. If she did not confront that moment that tried to silence her so that we could not hear her to get the development that we need in this season, we would have been challenged. And so we're grateful that hell lost again right here.
Ooh, got
Right
that one.
here,
Mm,
we see this
amen.
moment
Ooh.
where he lost. And the thing that I want us to really lean into is a lot of times we try and hide and cover up and put dirt over the painful moments that caused us to move into survival mode. In reality, when we try and hide and cover up those survival moments, the enemy wins because that was his dagger to stop the oil from flowing.
Mm,
That was his moment where he tried to step in and silence you for the future. And so you are doing a disservice if you do not go back. And my spiritual mom, she says this to a lot of us all the time. I need you to do a timeline of your life. I need you to go back and I need you to write down the key moments of happiness. I need you to write down the key moments of sadness, of trauma. And if you do that, you can start to zone in on those moments where the enemy came and attacked you as a child. And when you do that, you're finding it, right? You're finding the hidden piece that was never supposed to shape you in that way. Then when you find it, you analyze it. You can analyze it by yourself. You can analyze it with a coach. You can analyze it with a therapist. After you analyze it, then you have to uproot the root. When you analyze it, you then have to uproot the root. And it's once you uproot the root that then you can start to really confront your calling. And so this is literally like fresh off the presses. A week ago, I was going on a drive and I felt the Lord share with me that you're not going to be a bleeding leader. You're not going to be a bleeding wife. You're not going to be a bleeding mother. And as I sat with that, as I am in literally one of the most difficult stretchings of my life, it is difficult, it is hard, it is It brings tears out at random moments, but it is a gift that God is allowing me to find the roots, analyze the roots, and pluck it up. And so for me, it's understanding how not having a father, not having physical protection, not having physical provision from the male, how that has played out in my life. And if I'm going to say you are going to be a woman, then I'm going to make sure that you operate in the fullness of a woman and not a pseudo man, as many independent women do.
Mhm.
And
Ooh.
so, to your point earlier, that's what the confrontation of calling looks like. It doesn't feel good, it hurts, you cry. But on the other side, lucky him. Lucky
Yeah.
children, lucky people who will be led by me. And so,
Mhm.
this is all a part of the process. What are your thoughts about all of that, Diane? I know I done
That
went on
was so
here.
good. No, that was so good because that's a process I've also been going through. And what has grounded me in this period is that I'm placing my identity in who God already called me and told me I was. And that is outside of any circumstances, any experiences that we have gone through. I am a daughter of the Most High King. And with that comes a level of responsibility as being a co heir with Christ. And it also comes with promises. So I think to combat this false humility, first we have to reestablish our identity in Christ. We affirm ourselves in that truth. We are already chosen. We don't have to search to be chose by anyone. We are already chosen. We are already loved just for being. We are already worthy. I am already worthy. And I had to remind myself, and I have to remind myself, because what the enemy will try to do, he would try to tell you that you're not worthy of the calling that is on your life. But the truth is, before you were born, that calling was already placed on you. Before you were even created, God said, there needs to be a Jamila because we have this problem. So he created her. So I want everyone to know that you are needed, you are worthy, and you need to live in your calling.
You are worthy. You need to live in your calling. So you
Mhm.
got to go back and find your God identity.
Identity.
And, it's so interesting because a lot of times, one thing that's personal to me is like when I see children getting Christian in church
Mm.
or being dedicated back to God. And I think about some of the prayers that are released over them. And one that I know is missing, I don't feel like it's missing, I know it's missing, is understanding for there to be a special protection and covering from words, from teachers,
Ooh.
from students, from parents over that child's destiny based upon the reason God put them on earth. And so, something that I don't share much, but I am uniquely burdened when I see someone may see someone a criminal. Someone may see, a person, they be like, oh, they crazy, they lost their mind. What I see is how did they get so far from the original design that God created for them?
Mm.
What were the things that tainted them? And because at one point I was an educator and I started at the lowest level, I can't understand how my kindergarten babies end up one day being a murderer. They
Mm.
were so innocent. But it's those things of like the environment they were in, what words were spoken to them, what words were spoken over to them. And as we are sitting here, if you are a parent, if you will be a parent one day, I push you right now in this moment to pause and ask God, who did he give you and what did he create them to be? Because your parenting style needs to match what their destiny is. And we see this in the Bible with Samuel.
Mm.
Samuel's destiny
Yep.
warranted a different type of parenting, which had to release him. And so we don't have to go through, as adults, such a damaging moment when confronting our calling, if we can all collectively agree as a Christian community to start to actually rally around who is that and what did God create them to be. So if you have an apostle in your house, stop telling them to sit down with them crazy ideas. They're born to be visionaries.
Mm.
If you are raising a prophet, take heed to the words that are coming out of their mouth, because it's likely the word of God. Right. And so it's, if you have a socialite that's always bringing, the other kids to the house to rally around something, you probably have an evangelist.
Come on.
But if you haven't done the work to really sit down and ask yourself, who do I have dominion over? Who has God trusted me to be the overseer of their destiny here on earth to be? We get to this place where the confrontation of calling could be a fight. And so I want to ask you, did you, once you started to sense that God had a different identity for you,
Yeah.
how did you handle that? Like, were you a fighter? Were you like, yes, Lord, I'm excited, I'm rolling through, God? Yes.
No, not at all. Not at all. So my background is in applied mathematics. So I am a logical thinker. I need step by step. I need to understand exactly where I'm going, how I'm going to get there, who's going to be there along the way. I need to have all the details because for me, that's how I solve problems. And when God was calling me kind of even out of the mathematical space, I was like, no, you're not talking to me. You must be talking to someone else. You called the wrong line. Sorry, you must be talking to my sister. You must be talking to my best friend. This isn't me. And I just kept going back and forth of like, I don't know if I can do this. And what the Lord had to remind me is that you're not supposed to do it alone. He calls us into things that are greater than ourselves so that he can get the glory. The way the Lord gets the glory is he uses the simple to confound the wise. So he uses people who seem like they shouldn't be doing all that they should be doing. But when you remind people as you're living in your calling that I am actually grounded in the one who created me, God of the Most High, then his name is glorified. So for me, I had to accept that I was weak. And then I realized that I wasn't alone in this. The Lord was guiding me. He was leading me down the paths of righteousness, which are multiple paths. And He was providing me with the right people around me, the right coaches around me. And I just had to submit to the process. So once I stopped struggling, it became a little bit easier because I stopped using my energy fighting God and started using my energy fighting for my calling. And that's what I've been going through. I've gone through it. I feel like there's always a new iteration of self because we're fully dynamic human beings. So there's a version of ourselves that we still have not learned yet. We're still going to be discovering ourselves year over year. That's the journey of life. And at each phase, I just become a little less resistant, a little less combative with God because I know that everything is used for my good because I'm called according to his purpose. So that's what kind of allowed me to release the or drop the gloves. I'll use a biting boxing mentality here. That's what allowed me to put my dukes down. I was like, God, I offer no resistance because I keep butting my head trying to do this in my own strength. And what I find is that I always need you. So that's really been my journey.
No, that's really rich. And we thank you, Diane, for being so transparent about not fighting, as much.
As
I, on
much.
the other hand, every day he might have to just knock me back down and be like, "Do you remember what I said?" And I'm like, "Oh, so you meant it like this." And when you
Mhm.
talk about the way we are wired, I'm a logical, analytical, studied woman where
Mhm.
like you literally made me an attorney, like an attorney and a strategist and a counselor and an advisor and a teacher. And so it's like you put all these things in me, and now you want me to try and make sense of God ideas, right? Like, it was like from my own experience around 2018, he just sat me down and said, "This ain't you." And I'm just like, "But this is me." And so for 5 years, he has been just having me reevaluate everything. And I think one of the things that we sometimes don't talk about is the grieving process, right? And there is a grieving process when it comes to you being confronted by your calling. Some people are blessed. They were like, "Since I was 6 years old, I knew that God told me to do blah, blah, blah." Go ahead. Thank you.
Not me.
Not most of us, okay? He might have told us a few times, but we didn't really hear it. And so we come to this place of confrontation. And it's at that confrontation that it's like, whoa. And if I'm honest, the thing that I've had to deal most with is not only the grief process, but then I call it calling dysmorphia.
Mm,
So, because of the way that some religious spaces operate, there was no way that I'm qualified to be called. That
mhm.
was the belief system that I had.
Yeah.
And there was no way I'm able to operate at this level of wisdom and understanding within this short 5 year standpoint. Like it's literally 5 years. Like in 2018, I was in the club. Like that's where I was in 2018. I was there sometimes in 2019. Right? Had
Mhm.
some relapses in 22. And it is what it is,
It is
right?
what it is.
And stuff, and it's just like, what? Like, no.
Mhm.
Um, and it was just like, it's one of those things where you can't look for acceptance and affirmation and acknowledgement from people who didn't create you. They don't have the plans for you. It says, "For I had the plans for you. Before I formed you, I
Mhm.
knew you." And I think it becomes harder and more difficult when we look for affirmation, acknowledgement, and all those things from people who were never who didn't create us. And so, yeah, you don't understand it. I don't understand it either. Why I'm wise. I don't understand it either. Why I have deep revelation. But guess what? I do. And so, whether you accept it or not, I'm gonna just go ahead and stop falsely being humble. What
That's
were
it.
your thoughts on that, Diane?
Yeah, as you were speaking, I was reminded of what my apostle told us earlier last year. And he had us write down um, all the things that we believe God has told us we are throughout our lives. Because what
Mm,
you will find is the Lord has always been telling you exactly who you are because God exists outside of time. So he's always speaking to the present, future, past versions of you at once. So he's really talking to the future you. He's saying, Diane, you are a speaker. He's saying, Jamila, you are a intercessor. You are these things. And he has told you from it. He's told you about it, whether through other people, whether internally, whether through dreams, whether through visions. He has told you. And you writing it down when you hear it, even though you don't believe it, it gives life to the words that the Lord has said. And then what I had to do while I was going through my confrontation moment is I had to open that back up and said, "Oh no, God already told me I was going to do this, so why is it a surprise?" And I think that the more we do that, the more we get downloads of who God is calling us to be. even though it may not seem like it right now, you're able to confront the enemy and attack the enemy when he comes with his attacks, because you already have the word of the Lord. That is our sword. So I think for me, and what I encourage other people to do, is write down who you already know God has called you to be, even if you don't believe it right now. And I think that's so key.
Listen, she just gave us an action step. And as she was giving y'all this action step, I had come up with a new action step. So y'all got homework.
Homework.
You have homework, okay? She has analytics and new teaches parents and students how to really manage mathematics at every level of growth throughout the child's journey. And so, she's a teacher, right? I'm a teacher. Always will teach. And so, in addition to, just doing what Diane said, if we think about this timeline that you're supposed to be doing, what's happened good, what's happened that was traumatic, which was painful, which was hurtful. And then you got to go back and say, where did God hint to me that I was me? Where did God hint to me that I was me? And something that could help you with you understanding that is what were some things where I uniquely made impact as a child? What were some things that I said about myself that seemed outlandish at the time? Because I truly believe that we are the closest to God when we are the youngest, before we become contaminated by other people's words, other people's experiences, and our environment. And here's my proof. Y'all know I'm a lawyer, so I'm going to prove my
Come
point.
on.
Proof is, as a child, I remember saying, I'm going to grow up and start my own law firm one day. I'm not working for people. And at some point, that left my mind, left my heart. As a child, I grew up knowing I was going to be a millionaire. It was nothing, like, right. And so I am standing in what God told me as a child, right. And so I'm like, Elite Ambition Law Firm. It's Jamila Moore's law firm, right? The millions are around the corner.
Come on.
Right? The way that I used to walk around church giving words to people.
Come on.
It's here. It's what I'm literally doing right now. But if we don't go back and do that timeline and do the work, we might miss it, and then we won't really have the full breadth of who we are. And so I'm just excited for us to be awakened and agitated in this moment to really confront the fullness of our calling. Because somebody's on here and they're like, I already know I'm Pastor so and so, I'm this, I'm that. But do you know the fullness? If you don't know the fullness, go on back, run it back. Diane, any final thoughts on this?
Yes, you were speaking to the parents earlier, and I feel another tug to kind of speak directly to them. So, a little background about me. So, I did get my degree in applied mathematics, but I also had the opportunity to serve as a classroom assistant in New York City public high schools. So, public middle schools, excuse me. So, as I was achieving my degree, I would help ninth grade and eighth grade algebra teachers with their children. And what Jamila spoke about the enemy planting seeds from teachers, other students, I witnessed as an outsider, as an objective viewer. I entered into a classroom with a teacher saying, "Don't worry about these children, they're throwaways." We call these the throwaway classroom because we already know they're not going to achieve. This is why it's a matter of life and death, right? Because if I am entrusting my children to this authority figure and they're speaking this type of language, even if they're not speaking it over my children, they're speaking it to people who are trying to help my children. They're speaking it to people who have access to my children. And I think that's why it's so important for you to listen to your child and see what they're telling you about them. I truly believe what Jamila said, that we're closest to God when we're younger. There is an innate freedom that comes with being a child because they're operating in the only way that they understand to operate, which is exactly how the Lord created them. So I think with parents, I just urge you to take the time to understand where your child's giftings lie, where their skills lie, even though it may be annoying. My nephew is a talker, but I know it's because he's called to speak to his generation. So even though it may be annoying, I give him the opportunity to speak his thoughts so that he does not become stifled, or he does not live in this false sense of humility or imposter syndrome because he feels like he's not accepted living in his calling. So I just urge parents and guardians and aunties, uncles, anyone, if you have access to children, just understand that you're speaking life into them. You have to speak life into them. You're speaking into a purpose that God has created. So I just felt to lean in that. So I just wanted to end there.
No, so good, so rich. If you want to connect with Diane, make sure you're following her at the Diane Experience. And then if you're like, Diane, I need you to help me confront my calling, email her at info@confrontationofcalling.com so that you don't have to walk through this alone, so that you can get the resources that you need to be supported in the way that you need to be supported. It is a clarion call that came here today to agitate us all into action, to show up as the authentic version of ourselves that God created us to be, and to stop hiding under this false sense of humility, for us to rise up and make sure that we're uprooting all the seeds that were planted that were never supposed to be there through that timeline activity, right? And then the final thing is for us to understand that we have a mandate to children in what we say and what we do and how we say it, how we pray, and what experience that they're having. If we have access to a child, we have that mandate. And so I'm excited to be here to support you all with one of my assignments, which is making sure that the businesses that you start do not come crumbling down because of what you don't know legally. To make sure that you stop giving away your wealth because you don't have the right trademarks, copyrights, and contracts in place. Y'all, it is time for us to wake up. It is time for us to be us, and it's time for us to go. Be more, do more. Let's journey to more. Take care.